So there were these two young fish, and they're swimming along, and they're having like the best day. And all of a sudden, this older fish swims right past them and nods at them, kind of gives them the little bro nod, fish nod, and says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish, they swim for a little bit longer when one of them looks over to the other and says, "Oh my gosh, what the heck is water?" What the heck is water? You see, these fish have been swimming in it their whole lives, and they didn't even know. I think the same thing happens to our lives. And in Mark chapter 8, I think the same thing happens as well. Have you ever just sat with someone who just doesn't get it? Like they just totally maybe don't get it. Or maybe there are situations in which we don't get it, where we don't understand kind of the world and the things that are going on in this life. As a person who's been in ministry for a really long time, 23 years now, people have come into my office, and oftentimes it seems to be after they've retired, and they sit down and they say to me after they spent 35, 40 years in a career, and they say, "You know what? I just didn't get it. I just didn't get it. I spent 30, 40 years hustling, working hard so I could talk about my accomplishments and numbers, how many followers I have, but I just didn't get it. I feel like I missed it." I mean, we all do this. There are things that we are swimming in. There are beliefs that we have about the world that we just don't get it until later. I mean, like something like the patriarchy. You know, how humans have created systems in this world that hurt both men and women. We've created this expectation that hurt both men and women. We've established norms that create limitations for both men and women. Today, when we're reading in the book of Mark, Jesus calls out his disciples when they just don't get it. It starts with another feeding miracle. It's the feeding of the 4,000 plus women and children, so it's a lot more than that. And it occurs, the feeding of the 4,000 happens in both the book of Mark and the book of Matthew, so just two of the Gospels. And all through this miracle, there are 7 leftover baskets of food. And the Pharisees, after this miracle happens, they have the gumption to go up to Jesus and ask for a sign. I'd be like, if I was Jesus, I'd be like, "Did you not just see what happened here when we fed all these people and then there were 7 baskets of leftovers? Are you not paying attention to kind of what's going on in here? Do you not get it?" And even in verse 21, Jesus says to them, "Do you not yet understand?" Next, Jesus goes and heals a blind man, inviting him to see in new ways. And then he invites him to go and get what Jesus is up to take the scales off his eyes and see what's going on in the world around him. And then finally, in verse 27, Jesus is working with his disciples, and he looks at Peter and he looks at the rest of the disciples, and he says to them just this question to see if they do finally get it, if they finally understand the water they've been swimming in. Jesus and his disciples, they go to the villages near Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he looked at his disciples and said, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples, they said, "Well, some say that you're John the Baptist, and others say that you're Elijah, and still others say that you're one of the prophets." And then Jesus says, "Okay, well, what about you?" And he said to Peter, he said, "Who do you say I am?" And then Peter looks at Jesus and says, "You are the Messiah." In the book of Mark, this is the first time that someone besides the author understands who Jesus is. The first time that someone, that Peter, gets what Jesus is up to. He looks at Jesus and says, "You are the Messiah." So what are you chasing that the world is selling you? Things like money or likes or prestige or power or pleasure. What's the thing that you're so convinced that you need to accomplish in order to feel like you're enough, in order to feel like you have this full life or you're living your best life? You see, I think Jesus is really pushing us here in Mark chapter 8 to get that the voices of the world, they're telling us to go do more and more and more and accomplish more and more. And what we do in the church, we call that a theology of glory. That there's something that we need to do to earn, even to earn good favor with God. But the point is that's not the water we're swimming in. That's not the point of life. And once we recognize that, it gives us the chance to live into what Jesus says in verse 34, when Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple doesn't need to hustle, but they need to deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life is going to lose it. But whoever loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for your soul? So what are you working towards? Is it the stuff of this world? Is it the approval of others? Is it admiration or acceptance or power, whatever it is? Or is it the gospel? It's living exactly how God created you, as good and enough and okay. Giving others love freely and grace freely and forgiveness freely. So here's my questions for you. Number 1, what is something that you didn't get when you were younger, but now you've grown older and you have a different understanding of it? And then number 2, what is a worldly thing that you find yourself chasing? I think we all have something that we find ourselves chasing. And that's what Jesus is warning us here about in Mark chapter 8. Thanks for joining me.